Welcome to the King Talk podcast, where we're all about truth, community, and discussing the things you care about because we care about you. Of course, I'm your host, Adam Coleman. Now, unless you've been stranded out on a remote island over the last year with no way of keeping up with current events, I'm sure you've heard about the protests that have been taking place among NFL players against injustice and police brutality. Now, just over a year ago, NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick caused a media firestorm when he began to demonstrate his opposition to injustice and unethical policing by sitting out during the national anthem and then eventually taking a knee during the anthem before each game. Now, from then till now, a number of players around the NFL began to join Kaepernick in kneeling during the anthem. And of course, more recently, in response to President Trump's inflammatory comments about these NFL protesters, we've seen a league-wide demonstration during the national anthem. Now, Kaepernick has been slapped with many labels as a result of these demonstrations, such as, divisive, unpatriotic, anti-American, and of course, anti-cop. However, the guest we have with us today doesn't buy into the Kaepernick is anti-police sort of narrative. Our guest is a police officer employed with the New York Police Department and one of the lead spokesmen for the Cops For Kaepernick Movement. Now, he's been very vocal about his support for Colin Kaepernick and taking a public stand concerning police brutality and injustice. But in addition to that, our guest is not on the sidelines in the fight against police brutality and unethical policing. He and a group of fellow officers have been dubbed the NYPD 12 and are the lead plaintiffs in a class action suit that they filed against the New York Police Department, taking the NYPD to task for implementing illegal arrest quotas, various forms of harassment, and retaliation against officers who speak out against unethical police behavior. The gentleman with us today is a whistleblower within the NYPD, calling out the very things that Kaepernick and others have been trying to bring to the nation's attention. So we have a lot to talk about here, folks. So I just want to give a King Talks welcome to Sergeant Edwin Raymond. How you doing there, brother?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, it's great, man. We appreciate you, being on the podcast with us today. I mean, we got a lot to talk about here, man. I mean, so many things going on in our nation concerning policing and the things that that you're all in. You're knee deep in it. So I just want to get right to it. Like I said in the intro, among other things, Kaepernick has been labeled as anti-cop and an instigator, to, in some people's words, in terms of a war on cops. But you and a number of other officers don't buy into that narrative. Tell us about the Cops For Kaepernick movement.
Well, again, thanks for having me. The movement was inspired by the Veterans for Kaepernick. So after Kaepernick initially started his silent protest on the field, I noticed that some veterans hashtagged Veterans for Kaepernick, and they basically let it be known that they support him and they support what he has to say because they understand the bigger picture. And I figured, the fact that veterans even have to come out is because of the narrative that he is anti-American, anti-flag, disrespecting the troops, etc. But really and truly, as he said himself, it's about bad policing. So I figured it'd be even more powerful and more important for officers to come out and show that we also get and understand what Kaepernick is doing, because it's not against officers, it's against the issues in the criminal justice system.
Sure. Absolutely. Now, as I understand it, you had the opportunity to speak with Kaepernick directly about what he's doing and your support for him. How did that meeting come about, and what are the kinds of things that you guys were able to discuss?
Yeah, last July, I was invited as a guest to speak on Hot 97 Radio. Nessa, who's actually Kaepernick's fiance, she invited me to speak about, at the time, the Alton Sterling and Philando Castile deaths had just occurred. And, the nation, the Dallas police shooting, Baton Rouge, all of this was brewing in the nation at the time. And people want to hear from the cops because people want to hear what the cops have to say. But most cops are on gag orders, especially if you're going to do it sanctioned through the departments that they work for. But we're still private citizens that have the First Amendment. So I decided to go on the show, and Kaepernick was there. He wanted to meet me because he saw the NBC piece that I did with the other members of the NYPD 12, and I guess he was inspired by that. He thought it was amazing that officers are taking initiative. So he came to meet me, and I did an interview with Nessa. And after the interview, me and Colin, we spoke, and we've been in touch since.
Hey, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. And so, what kind of sense do you get from him? I mean, is it kind of, have you been able to educate him on the things that you're seeing? So has that been able to inform his perspective as he's doing these protests?
Well, I'll tell you, he already gets it. He already gets it. He's done his research. He's done his critical thinking. He's done his objective thinking. He already gets it. And, he reached a point similar to where I was within the department, where I just couldn't watch the injustice anymore. I just felt useless if I didn't try to do something about it. And even though I'm employed by the very system that's exhibiting the iniquities I'm trying to change, he felt, the biggest platform in this nation is football. Everyone's tuning in. There's a reason why ad space is sold for so much during the Super Bowl. Everyone's tuning in, or not just the fact that everyone is tuning in, but the demographic that needs the message the most. The people who are in denial about the experiences of Black people in this nation and the fact that there is a real issue with policing in our nation, they are tuning in. And I thought him using that platform was brilliant.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it was interesting is that it's unfortunate. I'm glad we have you on the show here today to kind of give us more depth on it. But so many times people get caught up in the demonstration itself that the conversation doesn't move to what it is that he's actually protesting against. I think that people get caught up in the expression. And that's very unfortunate. When you first saw, what Kaepernick was doing, like maybe, when it first came to your attention, what was your initial reaction? Because I know there were a lot of things swirling around about, him wearing like the pig socks, and things like that. What was your first reaction when you heard, what he was putting on the table?
Well, the pig socks I didn't agree with. I felt he made it too easy for those who refused to hear his message anyway. He made it too easy for them to manipulate his message, and he addressed this actually. He had a Twitter post about it because I think he realized it himself, and he never wore the socks again. But wearing the socks wasn't a good move. It just made it too easy for those who are scrutinizing his actions to critique. And I'll tell you this: it's the number one question that I get from officers who ask me, why do I support this guy? It's the first thing they go to. Each and every time, it's the first thing they go to. How could you support someone who wore pig socks, calling us all pigs? I said, he didn't call us all pigs. When he does that gesture, it's definitely open to interpretation. But then once he gets on the mic and tells you what it is, you now have to take that. You now have to adjust what you thought it was. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening. Guys are just running off with the original narratives that they created based on seeing him with the socks. But I didn't agree with the socks, but him sitting out during the anthem, I understood. A lot of people don't understand. Many Black folks live this double life where you put on a face to go to work, you put on a face to function in society, but truthfully, you don't completely feel like part of this American family. You don't feel like the words in the anthem applies. You don't feel like the Constitution completely applies because of the issues that we face, policing being one of them. But it's really bigger than policing. The thing is, policing is what can, when things go wrong, it can leave someone dead in the street. But in terms of housing, education, this is myriad of different categories in which many Black Americans don't feel like they're truly part of this American family. So him taking the knee it symbolizes that. It's showing that, it's showing that we want to be included also. We're not being included, and we want to be included because we're here and we deserve a piece of the pie. With history, we've contributed to this pie. We were the main ingredient in the pie.
Sure. Absolutely, man. And, I think what's interesting about what you said is that my understanding is that initially Kaepernick was just sitting out during the national anthem. But after talking to some veterans, he decided to move towards taking the knee, which they informed him that was more respectful. And then likewise, with the pig socks, I mean, that's something that, he obviously it's out there. He did it but he, has, obviously changed in that regard. Did you kind of get that vibe from him when you guys spoke, that he was just open to change and growing in his perspective? Were you able to confront him on some of those things and really have that conversation?
Yeah. Well, just again, I met him about 6 weeks prior to him first starting his protest, so I didn't know it was coming. Yeah, but I wasn't shocked. Based on our conversation, I wasn't shocked. He's not trying to hurt anyone. He's literally just trying to shine the light on the issue. So, anything he's doing that he doesn't feel is doing that properly, he knows to make adjustments, which he has. Again, from sitting to taking the knee, from wearing those socks to never wearing them again. He knows to make adjustments if it's not achieving the objective that he's going after. Gotcha. Now, looking at it from your perspective, I mean, obviously you've been very vocal, and very involved in fighting that same fight, against injustice and against, unethical policing. Of course, being a sergeant, that you are, you must be very serious about the work that you do. Tell us a little bit about your background and why you decided to become an officer. Well, I was born and raised in Brooklyn. My parents were from Haiti, and at the time, growing up in the 90s, it was a lot more crime, drugs, crack cocaine, particularly. And I had somewhat of a tough childhood because I lost my mom at a very young age, and my father stopped working when I was just 6 years old, and we never had public assistance. So that came with a lot of, very, very humbling experience, but at the same time, it strengthened me. It let me know that I know how to suffer, I know how to struggle, and I can make it out of anything from making none of that. So my teenage years, different opportunities kept coming that would have really destroyed the trajectory. Like, it would have put my life in a bad direction. First, the opportunity to sell drugs, I declined. Opportunity to use drugs, I declined. Opportunity to join gangs, I declined. And around my mid-teens, this is when I started getting interactions with police officers. And it was unbelievable because I had nothing but respect for police officers. I was the kid on the corner that would wave at a squad car as it drove by. So I didn't understand what was going on, that made the cops treat me the way they did. But then going to school, I would learn that my friends were also being treated that way. And I went to school in Manhattan, and many schools in Manhattan, the students come from all 5 boroughs. So I had friends from all over the city. And they were having the experiences, whether it was Mount Haven, the Bronx, Uptown Harlem, Southside Jamaica, or Brownsville, Brooklyn. We were all having the same experiences with police officers, and I just didn't get it. So around 18, this was what I would call like the straw that broke the camel's back. I was walking with my teenage girlfriend at the time, teenage love story, and basically, cops in an unmarked car, plainclothes officers in an unmarked car, jumped out and just threw me on the fence and unlawfully searched me. And they took my book bag and emptied the contents of the book bag right on the corner. Didn't find what they were looking for because I didn't have it. I would have never had it. That's just not who I was. And they jumped back in the car and just drove off and left me there, kneeling down, picking up everything that was in my bag. And my girlfriend at the time was helping me, and I just felt so embarrassed. And I remember watching across the street on the other corner, the guys who were actual problems in the neighborhood watching me get searched. And I said to myself, wow, man, these guys, they're racist. They got to be racist. But then I remember thinking one of them was Dominican. You look Dominican to me as a black guy. And I was like, wait, how could he be racist when one of them was black? And he was the most aggressive one. And I remember being confused as to what that was and what caused that. So this, along with just wanting a career that will allow me to earn as much money as early as possible, because it was tough. Keep making the right choice when you're suffering, when you're in poverty. It's not easy. This is why there's a direct correlation between poverty and crime. So I didn't want to make the right choice, go through college, and then struggle going through interviews after interviews, because I started making older friends, and it was really mind-boggling. I would know friends with bachelor's degrees folding clothes at Macy's. When I was sold this idea that if you got a college degree, you got it made, I was like, wait up, she doesn't have it made. You know, he doesn't have it made. What's going on? So I remember brainstorming what career would allow me to earn as much money as early as possible and stay out of trouble. Not that I was a troublemaker, but when you're a young black man growing up in the hood in Brooklyn, trouble can find you. So and then that coupled with the negative experiences with the police department, that's when I made the decision. You know what? That's where I'm going to go. I'm going to see what is going on. What causes people to have the experiences that I've had at the hands of the police department. So that was the reason why I decided to join.
That's powerful, man. That's powerful. So I really want to ask you a question on that. You know, you talked about the types of questions that come up for somebody who's, you know, grows up in not the best circumstances, poverty or what have you, you know, whether or not to get involved in gangs, whether or not to get involved in, you know, illegal activities. You know, how do those experiences, you know, come with you to work, so to speak, when you're policing now? Like, how does that inform how you do your job today?
Well, one thing is the humanity of the people that I'm dealing with. Like, it gets to a point where, like, in cop culture, cop world, you almost start to forget the people you're dealing with. And that never happens with me, because the neighborhoods where people are struggling, that's my reflection. Those are my people. You understand? So the connection with them is never lost, no matter what it is that they've done. So when I run into youngsters who have already made poor decisions, because I'm from the same community and understand their thinking, for the most part, I'm pretty much able to reach them. And where I can use discretion, I use discretion, and where I can't, you know, I still have a job to do. But no matter what, I follow up. I follow up myself. I'll even follow up on my day off. I'll give a call. If I'm in the neighborhood, I'll even knock on the door to make sure, you know, and the young men in the community, they appreciate that. You know, they're shocked. They don't think someone cares that much, especially someone wearing the uniform that I wear. So from understanding how people make these poor decisions, I don't write them off as, oh, he's just a criminal when he's only 15 or 16. I understand that there are reasons behind these decisions, and I start from there when I'm speaking to them, when I'm interacting with them. And for the most part, I've been very successful. I actually also co-founded an organization to help deal with that, to help mentor at-risk young men in Brooklyn. It's called PLOT. Stands for Preparing Leaders of Tomorrow. And so that way I can continue. And, you know, it feels good to know that while I'm asleep, you know, young men in Brooklyn are being mentored because of something that I thought about in my living room one day, you know.
That's powerful. That's powerful. So, yeah, it sounds like, you know, a real community policing approach is kind of what you're describing, like really getting involved. Is that kind of where you're coming from?
Well, that's absolutely what it is. But, you know, unfortunately, I have to add, today the department says that that's the aim, that's the goal. And when I came straight from the academy, when I started my rookie year with community policing in mind, I was told by several supervisors to find another job. I was told that's not police work, that's social work. You know, I was told that I was young, I could find work elsewhere. We're law enforcement. We enforce the law, you know, as if we're just supposed to blindly, you know, enforce the law in a draconian manner. And you know, thank God I wasn't discouraged, but that's what I was told, you know, that this isn't the job for you. That's not what we do here. And today, you know, starting with the department right here in New York and many of the departments throughout the nation, community policing, we want to build bridges with the community. I right out of the academy, that was my objective, and I was scrutinized for it, and I suffered for it.
Well, let's go there, man. I mean, because it sounds like, you know, there's what you're saying is, as opposed to there being a community policing approach, there's a culture maybe on the policing side that prevents, you know, that kind of thing from happening. And that's right at the heart of what you and the NYPD 12 are doing. I mean, obviously, as I mentioned during the introduction, you know, you and a number of other officers are lead plaintiffs in a class action suit related to improper police practices that result in citizens being mistreated by police. You know, Tell us about that. What are the grievances that you and these other officers are bringing to the table with the NYPD?
Okay, well, so during the police academy, I remember trying to seek out what it was that caused the experiences that I had, and I couldn't find it in the academy. I was shocked at how good the training actually was. There's some areas we could have been trained a little bit better, but for the most part, there was nothing that said to racially profile, nothing that said in, plain English to all of the things, all of the iniquities that we're experiencing at the hands of police officers. Nothing is written that says to do that. So I was still a little confused and lost as to what it was. And in my very first day out of the academy on actual patrol, everything made sense in one day, and that's when I learned of enforcement quotas. And we had quotas for arrest, quotas for summonses, and quotas for stop and frisk. And I remember thinking, wow, okay, now I see what it was. Now, and I start thinking back at all the experiences I had as a teenager, and I realized it was usually towards the end of the month, or during the weekend, and it was usually for something innocuous. And you almost want to look at the officer like, you're a grown man and you're stopping me for this. But now I get it, because now I see the pressure that myself and my colleagues are under to meet these numbers, and I start witnessing what my colleagues are willing to do for those numbers. And I remember just putting myself in the shoes of the people, and I'm there backing my colleagues up just in case something goes wrong, and try to make sure. If I feel that my colleague is losing the person in the sense of how they're talking to them, that's where I try to jump in and switch the approach. Even though I'm there making sure my colleague is okay, I can't help but to sit and put myself in the person being stopped shoes, because I remember being in that position. And it just all made sense. And I said, you know what? I can't go along with this. No way. And, you start not meeting the quota. Some months I would surpass the quota, because crime occurs at happenstance. There's no, sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you're there to witness it, sometimes you're not. So some months I would actually surpass the quota, believe it or not. And other months I would not have an arrest for maybe 3 consecutive months. But another month I'll have 10 arrests. That fluctuation is the more realistic example of what occurs. But yet, if you study the data, you'll notice the officers have the same arrests, same amount of summonses for the most part every month, and that's literally a result of chasing a specific number. But I couldn't go along with that, so it first starts with conversations with your immediate supervisor. Sergeant pulls you aside, says, "Hey, I noticed you requested overtime last week. If you get your numbers, I'll make sure you get the overtime. Or I noticed that you have this event to go to and you requested leave next month, but you haven't gotten an arrest in 2 months. If you help me out, like in case you get denied for the leave, I can pull some strings and make sure you get the day off as long as you go lock up 4 people for the month." And I said, what exactly? And I'm literally watching my brothers and sisters be reduced to overtime and days and requests for days off. And I said, no way. I can't participate in this. This is crazy, So, yeah. So I was willing to take whatever retaliation they threw at me. I was willing to take. As you get more and more time, every 6 months, a new academy class graduates, and that puts you, it gives you more seniority. So there are certain assignments that are kind of traditionally reserved for rookies. It's not written, but traditionally it's reserved for rookies. And as you would get more time, you would never see those assignments again. It didn't matter how many rookies kept coming through the door. I kept getting those assignments, the retaliatory assignments. And I said, even though I didn't like it, I said, if this is what I have to do, so I don't have to so I have to directly contribute to my people suffering, then this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to transport that prisoner. I'm going to go watch that dead body. I'm going to stay with this HIV psych patient in the psych ward. They give you all these assignments that are usually reserved for rookies. And I was willing to endure it, but at the same time, it motivated me to study for my promotional exam. So I studied for the exam. I passed. I did really well. Out of 932, I was number 8. I ranked number 8. and over 11,000 people took the exam. So I did really well, and that was it. Once those test results came out, they finally knew how to hurt me, because even though I didn't like doing the retaliatory assignments, I would never show them that it actually affected me. But when it came to that exam, they knew you don't score that high without working hard. They finally had something to dangle over my head. But this is around the same time that a New York Post article about 5 Hispanic officers who were suing because of enforcement quotas. So people who knew my situation started sending me the link to that article, and that's when I say, you know what, I need to get in touch with these attorneys. And, I got in touch, joined the lawsuit, became the lead plaintiff, and, now the NYPD 12 is formed, and we're suing to eradicate the quota system forever.
Wow. That's a powerful story, man. I tell you, it's just, for people like myself, it's hard to kind of get behind the lens of officers who are actually out there day to day. And, just hearing you describe kind of that tug of war between, wanting to do your job, wanting to support your fellow officers, but, having a debt to the community to do things the right way. Can you talk about, just kind of describe that for a second? Have you had any interactions with, officers directly, like maybe, somebody kind of, so to speak, walking the beat with you, where that became an issue, between doing things the right way and choosing not to?
Unfortunately, yeah, it happens. It's when you're out there, and this is why you'll hear me say often, I have front row seats to the madness. I have front row seats to this thing. It happens. Like I said, one thing that's popular is purposely arresting someone at the end of your tour, the end of your shift, because of the overtime dollars that are going to be associated with that arrest. It's disgusting. This is not the social contract. That's not to meet the ends of justice and everything that, all the reasons that we're given arrest powers. That's just because you want to fatten up your paycheck with overtime. And again, I'm watching my people, myself, because when I see them, I see me. They are me. I'm watching me get reduced to just somebody's overtime. And it was tough seeing that. And so what I did, on the scene, I wouldn't say anything, but back in the lounge, back in the station house, I'd be quite vocal about my disgust, and it made a lot of guys uncomfortable. Slowly but surely, I started becoming ostracized, and on social media, guys started deleting me off of their social media, and then guys who were very loyal to me would come back and say, "Yo, just be careful for this guy. He doesn't have good things to say about you." And I think they knew, if something went terribly wrong out there, I would not be the one to manipulate a story. I think they understand that, and that's why they weren't happy. That's why they weren't too comfortable with me. That's just the honest truth.
I understand. So now let's go there for a second. So you say you have an officer who's interested in, getting that extra bit of money for the overtime, or maybe he's trying to get that arrest for, some extra time off or something like that. And he knows he's got to get that arrest, right? Who are the type of folks that might be most vulnerable? Like, is it, who's he going to go after, to get those numbers?
Yeah, you can't do this. You can't do this to white folks. It wouldn't last. Within a week, the operation would be shut down. You have to do this to the people who lack political clout. You have to do it to the proletariat. And the proletariat in the United States of America are people of African descent. Wow.
So it's just a more vulnerable population.
Absolutely.
It makes sense.
And there's also the pseudo justification of, well, this is a high crime area. Well, this is where the crimes are taking place. You see, once you're able to mask it as, no, we're just sending resources to where the crimes are, it almost, it's if you don't give it a little bit more thought, that almost sounds good. That almost sounds like a good thing. Well, the officer was there because homicides have increased, and happens to see this young black man riding his bike on the sidewalk and stopped him and gave him a summons. It almost sounds good, but that's not, that's no excuse. It's no excuse.
Well, yeah, I mean, even for people who are, advocating against Colin Kaepernick or speaking out against him, I mean, they might point to things like statistics and arrest records and all these kind of things. But it sounds like from what you're describing that these type of practices will undermine the validity of some of these statistics. It sounds like it could be skewing what we're seeing from the outside looking in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give an example with New York. I don't know how this fits other states and cities, but in New York, the number one reason that people are arrested are marijuana charges. But the Department of Health statistics shows the demographic that uses marijuana the most are white Americans. So when people think of crimes, criminals, and people being arrested, they think of the most violent crimes. But that's not, thankfully, it's not violent crimes. Violent crimes are the reason that most people are arrested. The number one reason, everything goes back to marijuana. The number one reason people are summoned, number one ticket that's issued in the NYPD in New York City is public consumption of alcohol. So again, something that's done across racial, ethnic, even religious lines, across all the demographical lines, but yet the people who end up in cuffs, the people who end up with summonses for it are the people who look like me. So these statistics that they try to use, it doesn't fit. It doesn't truly fit the narrative. If you zoom out and peel back the layers, it doesn't fit.
Interesting. Wow. So you join up with these 5 officers, who were seeing the same things that you were seeing. Tell us about that a little bit. What was it like to unite with other officers who were also willing to step out and speak against these things? And what are you guys putting on the table when it comes to the NYPD? What are the grievances that you're laying out?
Okay. Well, it was amazing. 3 of those officers actually had already made history because they were witnesses in the stop, question, and frisk trial known as David Floyd versus the city of New York. And they made history because they were willing to testify against the department while being active police officers. That's pretty unheard of. So they were already my heroes. I had already known who they were. I'd read their names in transcripts. One of them actually had a little media exposure, a brother named Adil Polanco. He had a little bit of media exposure. And I was a rookie when I first came across his video on ABC7. And he, it was a breath of fresh air to know that I wasn't alone in the way that I was thinking, that this is crazy. So yeah, I was honored to be amongst them. The 3 of them were already heroes of mine. Other people started contacting the attorney. So the original 5 plus me makes 6, and then the attorneys added 6 more based on the people that were contacting and which cases would help the class action the most. So again, I felt honored to be amongst them. So what we're trying to do is use the same power of the court that has changed stop and frisk. For instance, in 2011, there was 686,000 stop and frisk in New York City. Last year, there were less than 12,000. And that's the power of the court. You understand? So we're trying to use that same power to eradicate the arrest and summons quotas. Because with the stop and frisk trial, I always say stop and frisk was definitely on the target, but arrest and summons quotas, that's the bullseye. That's the bullseye. Once you hit that center, that's the real deal. Stop and frisk is important, but this is it. This is the cream of the crop to go after this right here. So but again, 3 officers testifying as witnesses was able to successfully secure a victory in the stop and frisk case. 12 officers as plaintiffs. This is what you're going to need to secure the victory in this case.
Absolutely. And that's interesting. So, so when you say that this is the arrest quota, that's the bullseye, help us to understand that, like if you eradicate that, how does that change the dynamic between officers and the community? What would that look like? Mm-hmm.
2 things. A lot of the stops that end up, tragic, start out with an officer just trying to meet their quota. So once you eradicate the quota, you're going to get less nonsense stops. And usually when someone is stopped for something serious, they put up less of a fight. Because they know, you know when you're doing something serious. But the more innocuous the infraction, there's a part of you that's like, really, officer, you're harassing me right now. Even though technically the officer is within the parameters of probable cause. Technically the officer can enforce this infraction, but broken windows policing combined with a quota, it causes officers to not only enforce innocuous infractions, but enforce them as if they're the crime of the century. because they have to, because behind the scenes, they're really just trying to meet their numbers. So when you eradicate that pressure to meet your number, you get much better policing because you get discretion. For instance, I will stop someone who rides their bike on the sidewalk because it is a hazard. But now the difference is I'm not going to take it up a notch simply because I'm trying to rile the person up to meet my quota. And I'm going to explain to the person exactly what the situation is. And I think the person could respect that, get right on your bike on the street. I did my job. I addressed the condition. You're off the street. Everybody's happy. But when you're trying to make that arrest, you have to write that summons, or you can't use the discretion. And it's just going to create an atmosphere that we do not need. This is not what police aren't. The social contract, the Pelian principles, the Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, the godfathers of the social contract. It wasn't for the purpose of, harassing the public. These principles and all of these early philosophers, they thought of these ideas for a better society. So when you eradicate the quota, it goes back to those founding principles of what policing is supposed to entail.
Now, I want to make this a little bit concrete here because that makes a lot of sense to me. So when we look at these, major cases over the last few years, I'm thinking about, Philando Castile, of course, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, or even closer to home for you with the Eric Garner case. Would you say, if I'm understanding you correctly, would you say there's this connection between these unethical arrest quotas, these police practices that the NYPD 12 is addressing in the class action suit, and these types of cases like Eric Garner that end up going a terrible direction, and then we end up hearing about it on the news? Would you say there's a connection there?
100%. I'll tell you this. Usually I don't comment on specific cases, so I'll generalize it, and you plug it in yourself. When you're in anti-crime, which is plainclothes unit, your quota isn't just arrest. It's specifically felony arrest. The most coveted being an arrest for a firearm. If you're unable to get an arrest for a firearm, then the rest of your arrests simply have to be felonies. All right? So untaxed cigarettes is a felony. Let's just leave it there.
I see what you're doing here, right? Okay.
4 months. If you want to remain in the unit, you got to get 4 felony arrests a month. All right? Selling bootleg CDs, if you sell over 100, that's a felony. Just to give you an idea of something completely harmless that can still be a felony. Well, I wouldn't say completely harmless, but
And so, I was interested is that, when you have officers who just come to stop an individual, they have to make split second decisions, particularly if they're in a bad area or something like that. Could it be that, some of these, this extra dynamic, these quotas, could it add an extra bit of anxiety to the situation that could, influence how somebody might respond in a given situation?
Well, psychologically, if you keep arresting the same people, even though, just being in cuffs, when you're walking out of that patrol wagon or in the patrol wagon, people don't know it's just a marijuana cigarette or you didn't pay a summons for public consumption of alcohol, so now you have a warrant. Basically, whether you're in cuffs for a homicide, a rape, or not paying a summons, when you're in cuffs, you all look the same. But psychologically, what that does to an officer, it just makes we use a generic term, perp, when referring to prisoners. Whether you raped someone's grandmother or stole something in the store, you're a perp. And to use the same exact word for completely different things, just think about what that does psychologically and how it causes an officer who works in that environment to see the people that they're responsible to police. So now, if there's no incentive to actually get to know the person on a human level, a community interaction with the person, with the people in the neighborhood, you start to think the entire neighborhood is filled with just criminals. So now when you make a stop fueled by the quota for the most innocuous thing, you still think you're surrounded by these hardened criminals. So when you couple implicit bias with your own intuition based on everything I just said, it does create more of a dangerous environment where an officer can feel there's more danger there or perceive more danger than there actually is. And implicit bias alone, you don't even have to be, you can literally walk in day one without even having any patrol experience and already harbor these feelings because of implicit bias and how it works in this country, which is whenever people ask in terms of training, what could be done, I always say implicit bias. Is implicit bias, and specifically, not just implicit bias, but critical race theory. Because implicit bias tells us we all have these impulsive thoughts when it comes to race. But critical race theory gives you the history of why that is. And when you know the history, it really helps you unthink those impulsive thoughts to the point where they happen less and hopefully never, but mostly happen less because it's not easy to get rid of completely. Even I have them at times, but I quickly correct it.
Sure. So I want to go back to the case for a second. This is just fascinating to me, but
it's cool.
What kinds of evidence are you bringing to the table? Because I can imagine that this is a pretty sharp hill to climb. So what kind of evidences are you bringing to the table and making your case?
Okay. Well, from studying the stop and frisk case, I studied it very closely. Every article I could get my hands on, I Googled it daily because I was just watching it very closely. When it got to the point where department officials were testifying, I just couldn't believe the fact that they just completely lied on the stand. Like, they completely defended the department, even if they had to lie to do so. And there were things they were saying that the department doesn't engage in that I would listen, I would read it at 9 a.m., and then when I go into work at 3 p.m., I was being asked to do the very things that I just read that a chief said we don't do. So when I realized how much they were willing to lie, that's when I said, you know what, I'm not going to budge and ever play this game, so I need to protect myself if I ever decide to take any type of legal action. And I made the decision. That's something that I'm proud of, but something that was just essential. I recorded. I decided to record conversation. And so that's it's 12 of us. We all have our different types of evidence, but the most important evidence will be the recordings, the recordings of exactly what we're trying to prove. We will have no problem proving it.
Wow. So we're talking about recordings between you and supervisors in regard to these quotas that you're putting on the table.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Well, I can't imagine that you're a very popular guy in your department.
Yeah.
Is there still an issue with backlash today? I mean, is that still, kind of going on? Or?
Well, when my story first became public because of the New York Times article that featured the story, I was shocked at the amount of support that I got. That's not what I prepared for. I was really shocked. Yeah, because again, that anxiety that officers feel for having to finally meet the quota, be able to breathe, but then the first day of the new month, it's back, who cares what you did last month? What are you doing this month? It's right back to square one. A lot of officers, they're looking forward to the day when that's no longer the case. Where they can go out there and actually police the way that they want to police and interact with the community, be the community officer when it's time to be the community officer, and be the hardened law enforcement official when that's time for that also. You have to be able to be malleable, when you're in the uniform. We wear different hats for a reason. So there's been a lot of support, but yes, I read a lot of horrible things about me online from people who suppose, this whole blue thing. I thought I was blue. What happened? If I was blue, why are you saying this about me? Which is, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, there's been, unfortunately, mostly online. The day hasn't come that anyone said anything to my face, but I'm no fool. I know when I'm not surrounded by friends. I can feel people's energies, and some people can't hide it. They just cannot, they wear it right on their face. They cannot hide the fact that they don't like me. But I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm just here to change the system.
Right. Just kind of taking that pressure off of the officer, taking the pressure off of the citizen.
Yeah. I'm saying the ones that recognize that, they appreciate it. But there's others that, just culturally, I wore a wire, I recorded, I'm a rat. That's it,
Right. Now, I want to ask about that. I mean, in terms of this pressure, coming from on high, so to speak, like what is it that is driving these folks in upper management, so to speak, in these offices, these departments, why are they applying this pressure to, the officers out there to go out and get these arrests? Is there some type of incentive for them, or?
It's the same thing that drove slaves, money. It all goes back to money. Those summonses become dollars, and mass incarceration, there's a lot of dollars involved in that also. So,
right.
So at the end of the day, that's what really is at the root of all of this: greed and money. And they've literally found another way to turn black folks into money, and it's through the criminal justice system.
Wow, man, that's wild. So what we're seeing then is this connection between dollars and the criminalization, essentially. Turning into these unethical police practices. But, so you mentioned that folks have reached out to you in support. Has this just been locally, or have you heard from people from maybe other parts of the country who are attesting to, the same things that you're seeing and then reaching out to you from elsewhere?
Yeah, it's been unbelievable. I'm truly honored, able to bring, to inspire folks. It's actually all over the world, from South Africa to Australia, Sweden, Netherlands, it's actually all, even England also just reached out. It's all over the world, and obviously in the nation. The officers in St. Louis reached out, Texas, all over, all over officers have been reaching out, sharing with me the things happening in their departments. A lot of times it's exactly what's happening in this department, because what starts this is CompStat. The strategy that the department uses. CompStat revolutionizes policing in New York about 22 years ago, and other cities then emulated. And wherever CompStat went, the arrest quotas went with it. Summons quotas went with it. And so a lot of times when other departments want to hire a new chief, they go to retired NYPD chiefs. And what do? They bring exactly what they know to this small city. And this is what causes it to spread throughout the nation. This like the Ferguson report, after the Mike Brown, everything that the Department of Justice found in that report, New York is the mothership. New York is where it all really comes from.
Right. Okay. Well, let me ask you this. What do you say? I guess on the flip side of, what do you say to people who empathize with officers? In these discussions, and I guess kind of want to either give them a pass, or like, how do you approach people who push back against you and say, you're just on the wrong side of this argument? Maybe not necessarily officers themselves, but just people in the community. How do you approach them?
Just ask that again. I'm sorry. So you're saying the people who empathize with the officers in what sense? Because I don't think that doesn't apply to me. I empathize with the officers. I am an officer. Right.
So is that, so for example, like somebody who might be watching the NFL game and see these NFL players protesting, and kind of launch into the, the typical thing that you hear, like, officers have to make split decisions, and, we ought to stand by them, and that kind of a thing. Like, to the common man who may not have the insider information that you have, how do you speak to, those types of concerns that they might have?
Well, again, this is not about officers. It's not about individual officers. This is about a systemic issue. It's about the systemic problem. It's about the problems in policing. And if they don't understand that, then they're not having the right conversation. They need to understand this is not about, denouncing policing in general. This is about all of the iniquities and issues in the police departments throughout this nation. We have a systemic issue, a national issue when it comes to policing, and, police officers dealing with certain demographics in this nation. That's what it's about. So those that frame it as anti-cop, it's wrong. It's anti-injustice, no matter who's doing it. And even if it's coming from the cops, because now when it's coming from cops and there's no accountability, it's technically sanctioned by the state. And we can't have that. That's not how a true democracy functions. So anyone who sees it through that lens, they're not truly understanding what it is. And this is why, again, I felt I had to use my voice to help people see it for what it is. And I'll tell you, there are many officers who were mature and decided to ask me, because they didn't understand how I could support Colin. And after the conversation, they're like, wow, okay, thank you, because I didn't see it that way. I would never have seen it that way. And I mean, I wish I could speak to 300 million people, but
maybe one day, man, who knows, right?
We need the nation to understand this is not about officers. This is about issues in policing. Officers are all going to be involved, yes, but it's bigger than officers. This is about issues in the police system, in the criminal justice system, because, as Tim Wise says in one of his books, white America wasn't aware that the criminal justice system was flawed until OJ. Prior to that, they thought the system was perfect. What's flawed? It's infallible. We knew it was flawed from day one.
They may have been late on that one. Yeah, I'm with you. With you there. I mean, obviously, man, police officers, serve a vital role in our society, and unfortunately, the actions of some officers, have led some people to kind of taking a broad brush approach and putting all officers in a negative light. But it's not about that. What would you say in terms of how can our communities engage, partner with, and when necessary, confront, local police agencies, rather, to ensure that citizens are protected and treated fairly, by police, and then vice versa, that police officers are in a good space as well.
Well, I'll say this: it's probably not too popular, but become the officer that does just that. Do what I did. Don't sit here and tell them what to do. Go police your own community. That's what I did, and I made sure I put everything on the line to make sure that the things that I didn't agree with, I would never engage in. And people learn that it's not so easy, because this becomes your livelihood, the way that you feed your children, the way that you just, get the resources that you need to live somewhat of a comfortable life. And now you're stuck between the rock and the hard place of making the right decision while trying to not cause issues in your workplace and, the way that you earn your bread and butter. And you have a different respect. You have a different understanding and respect. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, what are some specific, if you could speak to that, 300 million people, what would you tell us in terms of the types of reforms that are needed, across the nation in order to make things, make this nation a better place from a policing standpoint?
Well, one of the things that I feel that people don't understand is how race works in America and the fact that it's still a real issue. I'm completely convinced that most people think it's something that was solved already, and individual bigotry, isn't enough to cause the widespread issues, and only individual bigotry exists. They can't even begin to fathom what systemic racism is. I feel that critical race theory needs to be taught from junior high school, if not elementary school, early as possible, so people can grow up understanding how race works. And once we are able to acknowledge, because the first step to solving any issue is to acknowledge it, and we haven't even acknowledged it. There's a whole portion of this nation that doesn't even want to acknowledge it. They think it's made up, blaming the white man for your blaming the white man for your downfall. In their eyes, slavery was 150 years ago. Why are you still talking about it? They don't understand the lasting effects. They have no idea what redlining is. They don't know that first World War II, after World War II, that blacks couldn't get the GI Bill. They don't understand. They don't know the Homestead Act that allowed whites to get property, that became, equity, that became college funds, that became from poor to white collar. They don't understand how white privilege and white supremacy worked. When people hear white supremacy, they think about the KKK. KKK is a joke compared to what white supremacy really is. So I think critical race theory helps people understand that this nation isn't some peachy place. This picture of this peachy place that's just a great place to be proud of. This is what our current curriculum likes to do. It forces patriotism on the population, and there's nothing wrong with getting people to be proud, but you have to tell the whole story, and that's how you that's how you truly heal. You tell the whole story. So critical race theory, I believe that's what, if we had critical race theory in their educational curriculum from a very young age, the kids will become the adults that we need to solve this.
Absolutely. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you, taking time with us here at the King Talk podcast. Much respect to you and the whole NYPD 12 for what you guys are doing. I mean, obviously, we see the protests by Kaepernick and others on television, but you and the NYPD 12 and other officers like you are speaking out are like the boots on the ground that can speak to the realities of what it is that he's trying to bring attention to. So I definitely appreciate the work that you're doing there, and just best of luck to you in the class action suit, and hopefully we'll be hearing some good things from it pretty soon here.
All right. Thanks again for having me.
I appreciate it. And to all of our listeners out there, stay tuned. You know how we do here at King Talk. Much love to you guys, and strong in the Lord.
King, you can hear it when I rhyme. I'm a king, renewed in my mind. I'm a king, I got a different bloodline. I'm a king, jump, I am a king. I'm a king.